In a time when shadows stretched long over the ancient city, Jerusalem stirred, not as stone and mortar, but as a living heart, wounded and shackled by the weight of its own sins. The skies darkened with whispers of coming judgment, and the winds carried the cries of a people lost between hope and despair. From the ashes of rejection rose a young prophet named Jeremiah, chosen not for his strength, but for his vision, a vision that pierced the veils of reality and dream. He saw Jerusalem as no other, a great soul, bleeding and bound, crying out for redemption. Now, through dream-woven paths and shattered ruins of faith, Jeremiah must journey, bearing a message forged in fire and sorrow. The fate of a city, the fate of a people, hangs by a thread, and the angels of judgment prepare to descend. This is the tale of the cry of Jerusalem, Jeremiah's prophecy, a story of courage against despair, of voices rising amid silence, and of a city's desperate hope for salvation. Step into the shadows and listen closely. The prophecy has begun. Chapter 1. The Vision of a Living City. Jeremiah was no ordinary boy. In the crowded alleys of Jerusalem, where the dust of countless footsteps stirred in the dry air and the voices of merchants rose and fell like the tides, he moved as if unseen, a shadow slipping silently through the ancient stones. His eyes held a depth far beyond his years, dark pools reflecting a soul burdened with knowledge and sorrow. He was a boy rejected by his own people, cast aside for the truths he dared to speak and the dreams he dared to dream. The city was alive, yet silent in its suffering. Jerusalem's walls stood tall but cracked, and its streets were heavy with the weight of unseen chains. Jeremiah often found himself beneath the gnarled olive trees outside the city, where the wind whispered secrets older than time itself. There, in the quiet moments between dusk and nightfall, the boy's heart would beat in rhythm with a calling far greater than any he had known. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in bruises of purple and gold, Jeremiah's sleep was broken by a vision unlike any before. It seized him, not gently, but with a fierce urgency that shook his very being. He was transported to a place beyond waking, a realm where the lines between dream and reality blurred into one. He saw Jerusalem, not as a city of stone and mortar, but as a living, breathing entity. A great and ancient beast, wounded and chained, its massive form trembling beneath the weight of its sins. Its heart, once vibrant and strong, now bled slow and silent tears. Its breath came in ragged gasps, echoing through the cavernous streets as if the city itself were gasping for mercy. The chains that bound Jerusalem were forged by the hands of its own people, iron links of betrayal, injustice, and pride. These shackles wrapped tight around its limbs and twisted its spirit into knots of despair. The city's cries rose as a haunting lament, a song of pain and warning that reverberated through the heavens and the earth alike. In the vision, Jeremiah wandered the streets of this living city, his feet silent against the cracked stones. Faces emerged from the shadows, mothers clutching their children close, their eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. Elders bowed low, weighed down by the burden of regret and lost hope. Priests who once guided the people, now blind to the creeping darkness invading their sacred halls. Above all, the sky was heavy and somber, a vast shroud of gray clouds swirling with the promise of impending judgment. The heavens themselves seemed to weep for Jerusalem's fate, tears mingling with the dust of the city below. Jeremiah's soul was torn between despair and determination. The vision spoke in whispers only he could hear, a message of warning and urgency. Jerusalem stood at the brink of ruin, its fate hanging precariously between redemption and destruction. The choice, the vision told him, was no longer in the hands of the city alone, but intertwined with forces beyond mortal reckoning. When he awoke, the vision lingered like a storm cloud over his heart. Sweat soaked his brow, and his chest heaved with the weight of the knowledge he now bore. The city was not merely a place of stone and memory. It was a living soul, crying out for mercy, salvation, and change. Yet who would heed the words of a boy cast aside, a prophet mocked and scorned? Who would listen when Jeremiah's voice trembled with the urgency of his message? Despite the loneliness of his burden, Jeremiah felt a spark within him, an ember of hope that refused to die. With trembling hands but steady heart, he resolved to walk the path set before him. The road would be dark, shadowed by the specters of doubt and danger, but within him burned a flame of courage that no shadow could smother. Jeremiah knew this was only the beginning. The cry of Jerusalem was awakening, echoing through the corridors of time, and the prophecy he carried would shake the very foundations of the world. The journey had begun. Chapter 2. The Burden of the Prophet. The dawn broke over Jerusalem with a heavy sky, gray clouds thick as morning veils stretching across the horizon. But inside the heart of the city, the air was thick with an unseen tension, a quiet before a storm no one dared to name aloud. Jeremiah rose from his restless sleep, the memory of his vision burning like a brand upon his soul. Each breath felt heavy, weighed down by the knowledge that his life was no longer his own, but tied to the fate of a city bound by sin and sorrow. He moved through the narrow streets with the careful steps of one who carries a secret too dangerous to share. The city bustled around him, merchants hawking spices and fabrics, children chasing through the alleys, elders exchanging whispered prayers, all oblivious to the invisible chains tightening around their beloved Jerusalem. To them, life was routine, a cycle of harvests and celebrations, hopes and fears. But Jeremiah saw the threads of their undoing, woven tightly into the fabric of their daily lives. Word of his visions had already begun to spread, carried in hushed tones among the common folk and whispered behind closed doors in the temple halls. Some called him mad, a dreamer lost in shadows and fears. Others saw in him the flicker of a warning, a voice crying out in the wilderness. Yet the priests, those who should have been his allies, turned away with scornful eyes, unwilling to confront the truths he bore. Jeremiah's heart ached with loneliness. The burden of prophecy was a heavy one, to see what others could not, to speak words they refused to hear, and to carry the weight of judgment on shoulders so young. But there was no turning back. The vision had marked him, chosen him, and the city's fate now rested in his trembling hands. That day, he sought refuge beyond the city walls, beneath the ancient olive trees that had witnessed centuries of prayers and tears. Here, the wind spoke again, carrying voices from the past, whispers of prophets who had walked the same path, bearing warnings that fell on deaf ears. Jeremiah knelt among the roots, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath him, drawing strength from the silence and the stones. As twilight fell, the city's cries seemed to rise again in the distance, a mournful lament echoing from the stones and shadows. Jeremiah closed his eyes and breathed deeply, steeling himself for the trials ahead. The angels of judgment were waiting, silent and relentless, poised to descend upon a city that might still choose its salvation. But how could one boy, rejected and alone, turn the tide of a city so vast, so broken? How could his fragile voice rise above the roar of sin and silence? The answer lay not in strength, but in faith, a faith that burned brighter than the darkest night, that carried the hope of redemption on wings unseen. Jeremiah was no longer just a boy. He was a vessel, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. And so, with a heart full of both fear and fierce resolve, he rose from the earth and turned his gaze back toward the city, Jerusalem, alive and crying, waiting for its prophecy to unfold. Chapter 3. Dreams and Shadows. The nights that followed were restless and thick with shadows. Jeremiah's sleep was no longer a refuge, but a passage into strange and vivid dreams, visions that carried him beyond the waking world into realms where the past and future intertwined like threads in an endless tapestry. Each dream brought new images, new warnings, whispered secrets from the unseen forces that watched over Jerusalem. One night, he found himself standing on the city's ancient walls, but the stones beneath his feet were cold and cracked, bleeding a dark, viscous liquid that shimmered like molten obsidian in the moonlight. The sky above burned with strange, flickering lights. Angels with swords of fire, their wings vast and terrible, poised to descend. Their faces were both merciful and merciless, eyes glowing with the weight of divine judgment, as if they carried the fate of entire realms within their gaze. Jeremiah's heart pounded fiercely, a mix of fear and awe flooding through his veins as he reached out to touch the nearest angel's blade. But the celestial beings remained distant, their voices a chorus of thunder and silence. They spoke not in words, but in feelings, hope and despair, love and wrath, mercy and justice, a language beyond mortal understanding. The city below was trembling, caught between the mercy that could heal and the wrath that could consume, suspended in a delicate balance on the edge of a blade. In another dream, the city itself spoke to him. Its voice was deep and weary, like the rumble of the earth itself, ancient and full of sorrow. It told of betrayal from within, leaders who fed the people with lies, priests who traded holiness for gold, neighbors who turned their backs on one another, and families torn apart by greed and fear. Jerusalem's chains were forged not by enemies outside its walls, but by the sins of those who dwelled within, shackled by pride, injustice, and the silence of broken hearts. Jeremiah wandered through the streets of these dreams, seeing shadows where light once dwelled. He saw the marketplaces empty, the laughter of children silenced, the sacred temples cracked and abandoned. The very stones seemed to weep with the weight of forgotten prayers and broken promises. Yet within the ruins, faint glimmers of light flickered, small, stubborn flames of faith and hope, waiting to be kindled anew. He awoke each morning drenched in sweat, his soul heavy with the weight of the city's pain, but also fueled by an ember of determination. Within those dreams lay a spark, glimmers of hope hidden in the ruins. The city was wounded, yes, but not beyond healing. Redemption was still possible, if only its people would listen. But the waking world was harsh. News of unrest and rebellion rippled through the streets like a dark tide, threatening to drown any chance of peace. The powerful clung to their thrones with iron fists, deaf to the cries of the poor and the warnings of a boy who dared to see what others could not. They whispered behind closed doors, plotting to silence him forever. Jeremiah knew the path ahead was filled with peril, not just from those who denied him, but from the darkness that sought to snuff out his very voice. Yet he was not alone. In the deepest corners of the city, among the forgotten and the faithful, whispers of his prophecy grew like sparks in the wind, ready to ignite a fire of awakening. Still, in the quiet moments beneath the olive trees, he held onto the flame within him, the flame of a prophet who had seen the soul of a city weep, and who would carry that cry until it reached the ears of those who still had the power to change. The cry of Jerusalem echoed in his dreams, and now it was waking the world. Chapter 4. The Silent Watchers. The city slumbered beneath a shroud of uneasy calm, but unseen eyes watched from the shadows. Jeremiah had come to understand that not all forces were bound by flesh and stone. Some were ancient watchers, silent guardians and relentless judges, hovering on the edges of mortal sight. They waited patiently, their presence a reminder that divine balance hung by a fragile thread. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long fingers of twilight over the city, Jeremiah felt their gaze like a chill upon his skin. The angels of judgment, the silent watchers, were poised to descend, their swords forged in celestial fires, their purpose unwavering. Yet they did not move without cause. The city's cries had summoned them, but their final step depended on the choices of those who still breathed within Jerusalem's walls. Jeremiah wandered once more through the city's winding alleys, each corner whispering secrets only he seemed to hear. Faces passed him by, merchants bargaining, mothers soothing restless children, soldiers marching to distant drums, each carrying their own burdens, their own sins. Some glanced at him with suspicion, others with curiosity, but all remained untouched by the gravity that weighed on his heart. In the market square, an old woman's voice rose above the chatter, telling tales of a young prophet who walked the streets, speaking of doom and redemption. Her words spread like wildfire, igniting hope in some, fear in others. Jeremiah knew that his message was a double-edged sword, salvation for some, condemnation for others. That night, beneath a sky heavy with stars, Jeremiah climbed the steps to the temple's rooftop. The wind carried the faint scent of incense and dust, memories of ancient prayers lingering in the air. He looked out over Jerusalem, its labyrinth of streets, its shattered walls, its beating heart, and whispered a prayer for strength. The silent watchers stirred, their presence growing closer, yet still held back by the threads of mercy. Jeremiah felt the weight of his mission settle firmly upon his shoulders. He was no longer a boy lost in dreams. He was a herald of fate, a voice summoned to pierce the silence before the storm. And so, with resolve burning brighter than ever, he prepared to confront the city's darkness. One word, one warning, one cry at a time. Chapter 5. Whispers of the Fallen. The weight of the prophecy pressed heavily upon Jeremiah as he moved through the labyrinthine streets of Jerusalem. The city, ancient and alive, seemed to breathe beneath his feet, its very stones whispering secrets of glory and downfall. He could feel the pulse of its history, victories carved in stone, betrayals hidden in shadow, prayers murmured and forgotten, all woven into the fabric of the city's soul. Each day brought new challenges. The people were torn between denial and fear. Some dismissed Jeremiah as a mad youth, lost in visions too wild to be true. Others watched him with wary eyes, unsettled by the urgency in his voice. But the priests and rulers, the keepers of tradition and power, hardened their hearts. They clung to their authority as if it were a shield against the coming storm, unwilling to see the chains tightening around them. In the marketplace, Jeremiah overheard whispers of rebellion, factions rising against one another, neighbors turning suspicious, the fragile peace fracturing like glass. The city's wounds ran deep, but they were invisible to most. Yet Jeremiah's vision cut through the veil. He saw the fallen angels, once glorious beings, now shadows of their former selves, wandering among the ruins, feeding on the city's pain. Their presence was a dark omen, a reminder that the spiritual battle was not only around Jerusalem, but within it. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting the city in a blood-red glow, Jeremiah found himself in the shadowed courtyard of an abandoned temple. The air was thick with dust and the scent of forgotten faith. Here, the echoes of ancient worship seemed to linger, mingling with the silent cries of a people who had turned away from their covenant. Jeremiah knelt amidst broken pillars, his voice barely a whisper as he prayed for strength. How long, O Lord? How long before the city hears? How long before the chains are broken? In that silence, a faint warmth stirred, a gentle pulse of hope that seemed to answer his plea. It was fragile, yet undeniable. The city was wounded but not forsaken. Redemption still glimmered on the horizon, if only its people would open their eyes. As night fell, the stars blinked into existence, silent witnesses to the unfolding drama. Jeremiah rose, his resolve unbroken. He was the voice for the voiceless, the cry for the silenced. The city's fate rested on the edge of a knife, and he would stand as its sentinel, unwavering. The angels of judgment were near. The chains tightened, but within the heart of Jerusalem, a spark of hope still burned, faint, fragile, but alive. Chapter 6. The Gathering Storm. Jeremiah could feel it in the very air, a rising tension that gripped Jerusalem like a tightening noose. The city, once radiant with faith and hope, now simmered with unrest and fear. Whispers spread like wildfire, carrying rumors of rebellion and betrayal through the narrow alleys and bustling marketplaces. Each word, each glance, seemed to stoke the flames of distrust that threatened to consume the fragile peace. The rulers, sensing the fragile balance tipping, tightened their grasp with iron fists. Soldiers patrolled the streets, their armor gleaming cold under the scorching sun, eyes sharp and unforgiving. Public proclamations echoed through the city squares, calling for order and loyalty, but beneath the surface, corruption festered. The priests, once the city's spiritual guides, turned a blind eye to injustice, their hearts hardened by greed and ambition. Jeremiah walked among the people, a lone figure bearing the burden of a prophecy too heavy for one soul. He saw mothers clutching their children close, eyes wide with fear, merchants whispering of lost fortunes, elders shaking their heads at the growing chaos. The city's heartbeat was faltering, its pulse erratic and weak. One evening, as the sky burned with the colors of dusk, Jeremiah climbed to the summit of the Mount of Olives. From there, he gazed down upon Jerusalem, its ancient walls scarred and weathered, its streets alive with restless shadows. The scent of olive trees mixed with smoke from distant fires, a bitter reminder of the city's unraveling. His mind swirled with visions of destruction, flames engulfing the sacred temple, stones crumbling into dust, families torn apart by violence and despair. Yet amid the darkness, glimmers of light pierced the gloom, acts of kindness hidden in secret corners, whispered prayers rising like incense to the heavens, the steadfast faith of those who refuse to yield. Jeremiah knew the angels of judgment hovered close, their wings casting vast shadows over the city. Mercy still lingered on the edge of the storm, but justice was inevitable. The choices of the people would decide their fate. In the gathering dusk, secret meetings took form, a quiet resistance born not of swords, but of hope. Followers of Jeremiah's vision gathered beneath the stars, their voices low but determined. They shared stories of courage and faith, weaving a tapestry of defiance against the darkness. As night deepened, Jeremiah knelt upon the hill, his voice rising in a prayer that echoed across the silent city. He was the cry of Jerusalem, a beacon in the gathering storm. The battle for the city's soul was no longer distant. It had begun in the hearts of men and angels alike. Chapter 7. Echoes of the Past. Jeremiah walked the ancient stones of Jerusalem with a heart heavy yet resolute. The city was a living chronicle, its walls soaked in the triumphs and tragedies of countless generations. Each corner whispered secrets of kings and prophets, warriors and priests, lovers and exiles. It was as if the very stones remembered the songs sung and the prayers whispered beneath the stars. In his dreams, the past unfolded before him like a vast tapestry. He saw King David, harp in hand, crafting melodies that stirred the soul of the nation, songs of hope, of divine promise, of a kingdom united under the light of the Most High. But intertwined with these visions of glory were shadows darker than night, betrayals that fractured the fragile peace, covenants broken by pride and lust for power, and the silent turning away of hearts once devoted. Jeremiah's soul ached as he beheld the cycle of sin and redemption that had defined Jerusalem's story. The chains binding the city were not merely forged by the present generation, but hammered out over centuries, by failures to uphold justice, by selfishness cloaked in religious ritual, by the neglect of the covenant that held the people close to their God. He remembered the words passed down from the prophets before him, warnings ignored, voices silenced, hearts hardened. Yet Jeremiah's vision was different. He saw not only the wounds, but also the possibility of healing. The city was wounded, yes, but not beyond repair. Redemption glimmered like a faint star on the horizon, waiting to be reached. But the people? They were stubborn. Many had grown comfortable in their blindness, wrapped in the familiar trappings of tradition and security. Fear whispered that change meant chaos. Denial cloaked the truth like a veil. In the bustling markets, Jeremiah faced the faces of his people. The merchant who counted coins with greed in his eyes, the mother shielding her children from harsh words and harsher realities, the priests who preached peace but traded in power. He raised his voice above the din. Remember the covenant. Remember who you are called to be. Some recoiled, labeling him a troublemaker. Others listened, their eyes flickering with doubt and hope. Jeremiah knew the path was lonely, the burden immense, but he was resolved to be the city's voice, even if it was a cry that fell on deaf ears. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in blood-red hues, Jeremiah climbed to the ancient city walls. From this vantage point, the stars began to pierce the twilight veil, silent watchers over a city poised on the edge of destiny. The echoes of the past whispered still, calling for awakening, repentance, and courage. The battle for Jerusalem was not just in the streets or the temples. It was in the hearts of every soul. Jeremiah's cry was the spark, a call to remember, to turn, to hope. The past was a guide carved in stone and spirit. The future remained unwritten, and the cry of Jerusalem would not be silenced. Chapter 8. Shadows over the Temple. The temple stood at the heart of Jerusalem like a shining beacon, a place where heaven and earth met, where prayers ascended like fragrant incense. Yet, beneath its gilded domes and marble pillars, a shadow was growing, creeping silently through its sacred halls. The corruption within the temple was a cancer, eating away at the very foundation of faith. Jeremiah's visions revealed priests adorned in finery, yet blind to the cries of the poor. They traded holy words for silver coins, their rituals empty shells masking hearts filled with greed. The sanctuary, meant to be a refuge of holiness, had become a den of injustice and betrayal. He wandered the temple courts, hearing murmurs of discontent, seeing the fearful eyes of worshippers who sensed the decay beneath the surface. The altar, once a symbol of divine mercy, now bore silent witness to the sins of those who offered empty sacrifices. Justice is forsaken, Jeremiah whispered to the wind, and mercy turned to stone. But beyond the priest's greed, darker forces stirred. Whispers spoke of alliances forged in secret, dealings with foreign powers who sought to control the city through manipulation and fear. The political games played beneath the temple's shadow were lethal, a web designed to ensnare the innocent. Jeremiah's heart burned with urgency. The temple was the soul of Jerusalem, and if it fell, the city's spirit would shatter. The angels of judgment circled higher, their wings casting vast shadows that stretched across the city. In dreams, Jeremiah saw the temple doors bursting open, flames licking the sky, the holy place reduced to ashes. But even in destruction, a seed of hope remained, a promise that from ruin, renewal might arise. He knew his warnings would be met with scorn, his voice drowned by the chants of false priests and the laughter of the powerful. Yet Jeremiah stood firm, a lone sentinel amid the gathering darkness, the cry of Jerusalem ringing louder with each passing day. The storm was coming, and the fate of the temple would mark the fate of all. Chapter 9. The Silent Witness. The city held its breath, caught between the weight of judgment and the flicker of hope. In the midst of the unrest, a profound silence stretched over Jerusalem. Not the calm of peace, but a heavy stillness that seemed to echo from every corner, every stone, every shadow. It was a silence that spoke louder than the chaos, a quiet witness to the city's fragile soul. Jeremiah found himself drawn away from the bustling streets and grand temples, toward the forgotten places where the city's true heartbeat lingered. Narrow alleys, shadowed by crumbling walls and winding like veins through the ancient city, held the laughter of children and the whispers of old men. Hidden gardens bloomed in secret courtyards, tended by hands weathered by toil, but guided by faith. In one such courtyard, Jeremiah encountered an old woman who had lived through more seasons of Jerusalem's story than he could count. Her eyes, sharp and clear despite the years, held a flame of unwavering hope. She tended a small patch of earth, where wildflowers grew amidst cracked stones, a testament to resilience in the face of despair. "The city cries," she said softly, "but so do the hearts of those who love her. In every tear there is a prayer, in every prayer a seed of redemption." Jeremiah understood then that the true strength of Jerusalem was not in its walls or its armies, but in the quiet faith of its people, the silent witnesses who held the city's spirit when all seemed lost. Their prayers rose like incense, their courage a balm against the gathering darkness. Yet the silence was deceptive. Beneath its stillness, tensions roiled like a storm beneath a calm sea. Factions plotted rebellion in shadowed rooms. Families were torn apart by fear and mistrust, and the city's soul was fractured by the chasms of betrayal and despair. The angels of judgment hovered unseen above, their wings stirring the air with a dreadful promise. In his visions, Jeremiah saw Jerusalem cleaved not just by walls, but by invisible divides between faith and doubt, justice and corruption, life and death. He saw brothers turning against brothers, neighbors betraying neighbors, and a city on the brink of collapse. But even in this darkness, the silent witnesses endured. Their quiet acts of kindness, their whispered prayers in the night, their steadfast refusal to surrender to despair. They were the fragile threads holding the city's tapestry together. Jeremiah's voice rang out, a cry to awaken these silent hearts. Rise! The time of reckoning is near, but within each of you lies the power to turn the tide. Do not let the silence become the city's tomb. The battle for Jerusalem was not only fought in the streets and courts. It was fought in the hidden places, in the hearts of the silent witnesses who carried the city's hope against the coming storm. The cry of Jerusalem echoed still, calling for awakening, for courage, for faith. Chapter 10. Flames on the Horizon. The horizon burned with the first light of dawn, but the glow was not one of hope. It was a warning. From the edge of the city, dark clouds gathered, rolling like a tidal wave ready to crash down upon Jerusalem's fragile peace. Jeremiah watched as the fiery streaks of the rising sun mirrored the flames of turmoil, igniting in the hearts of the people. The city was a tinderbox, its foundations trembling beneath the weight of years of injustice and neglect. Rumors spread like wildfire, whispers of rebellion, foreign armies on the march, and the coming wrath of the heavens. The angels of judgment, once distant shadows in Jeremiah's visions, now drew nearer, their presence palpable in the heavy air. Jeremiah's mind raced with the images from his dreams. Cities in ruin, temples broken, families scattered like leaves before the storm. He knew that the time for warning was nearly over. Soon, action would be demanded, choices that could shape the fate of a nation and its people. As the city awoke, so too did the unrest. The marketplace, once alive with the sounds of barter and laughter, now hummed with tension. Faces turned anxious, eyes darted in suspicion, and silent fears grew louder than any spoken word. Friends eyed each other with mistrust. Neighbors braced for betrayal. Jeremiah moved through the crowds, his voice rising above the murmur. Awake, Jerusalem! The flames on the horizon are not just those of the dawn. They're the fires of judgment. Turn from your ways before the blaze consumes you. Some heard and trembled. Others turned away, clutching their pride and denial like armor. But Jeremiah's words carried a power beyond fear. They were a call to remember, to repent, to reclaim the covenant that bound the city to its creator. In the distance, the first toll of the city's great bell echoed, a somber reminder that time was slipping away. The skies darkened, shadows lengthened, and the air thickened with the promise of what was to come. Jeremiah lifted his eyes to the horizon once more, where the flames danced like a herald of doom. Yet beneath the blaze, a faint glimmer remained, a spark of hope waiting to be kindled by those brave enough to answer the call. The cry of Jerusalem was rising louder now. The city's fate hung in the balance, and the dawn's fire was both a warning and a challenge. Would the people listen before the flames consumed them all? Chapter 11. The Broken Covenant. Jeremiah's visions revealed a covenant shattered, not by the hand of an enemy, but by the people themselves. The sacred promises, once etched in stone and heart, lay broken beneath the weight of neglect, sin, and betrayal. Jerusalem's soul bled from wounds inflicted by its own children. The covenant was a sacred bond, a pact of love and faithfulness between the city and its God. It was the foundation upon which the temple stood, the reason the stars still seemed to shine over the ancient walls. But pride had blinded the leaders, and the people had turned away, chasing after idols and empty rituals. Jeremiah saw the faces of those who once swore allegiance to the covenant: priests, kings, and common folk, all stained by compromise. Their lips spoke words of devotion, yet their hearts harbored rebellion. The altar was desecrated by greed, and justice trampled beneath the feet of the powerful. The covenant is broken, Jeremiah declared to the gathering crowds, and the wrath of heaven stirs because of it. Repent, Jerusalem. Return to the path of righteousness before the storm consumes you. But repentance was not easy. The people clung to their ways, their comforts, their false securities. Fear whispered in their ears, telling them that change meant loss, that the price of returning to faith was too high. Yet Jeremiah knew that without repentance, destruction was certain. In his dreams, he saw the consequences unfold: the city burning, the temple in ruins, families torn apart by exile and sorrow. The angels of judgment prepared their descent, their eyes fierce with righteous fury. Yet within the broken covenant, Jeremiah glimpsed a thread of hope, a promise that even shattered stones could be mended, even broken hearts could be healed. The call was clear: to rebuild, to restore, to rise anew from the ashes. Jeremiah's voice rang like a trumpet across the city. The covenant may be broken, but it is not beyond repair. Jerusalem, awaken. The hour of reckoning is here, but so is the chance for redemption. The fate of the city balanced on the edge of a knife, between destruction and salvation, despair and hope. The cry of Jerusalem echoed through the ages, a call to heal the broken, to restore the lost, and to reclaim the promise. Chapter 12. Shadows over the temple. The temple, once a radiant beacon of hope and divine presence, now cast long, creeping shadows that seemed to swallow Jerusalem's heart whole. Its grand columns stood tall, reflecting the sun's last light. Yet beneath the surface lay a festering wound of corruption and deceit. Jeremiah walked its marbled halls with a heavy spirit, each step echoing the sorrow of a sacred place betrayed. Priests, draped in ornate robes embroidered with gold and crimson, moved like phantoms through the sanctuary, their voices chanting prayers that rang hollow against the anguished cries rising from the streets below. The altars were heaped with offerings, but these sacrifices were empty gestures, tokens of devotion performed with fractured hearts and hands stained with greed. Jeremiah's visions pierced through the temple's splendor to reveal a darker truth: priests conspiring with merchants, bartering the city's soul for silver coins. The sacred trust placed in them was broken, replaced by whispered deals made in shadowed chambers, far from the eyes of the faithful. Justice was but a forgotten relic, trampled beneath the weight of power and avarice. In the temple courts, decisions favored the wealthy and influential, while the widows, orphans, and the oppressed were left voiceless and forgotten. The walls themselves seemed to whisper secrets, tales of betrayal, fear, and lies spoken in the name of holiness. Each stone bore silent witness to the chasm between the temple's outward beauty and the rot festering within. Yet, amid this darkness, flickers of genuine faith still burned. In hidden chambers beneath the great sanctuary, a small band of silent rebels gathered. These faithful few dared to pray in secret, clinging to hope and truth when all else seemed lost. Jeremiah sought them out, drawn to their quiet courage. The temple stands as a symbol, he told them, his voice low but resolute, but it is the spirit within that holds the power. Without truth, justice, and mercy, even the mightiest stones will cry out against us and condemn the city. As the city teetered on the brink of destruction, the angels of judgment hovered unseen above, their wings spreading wide, ready to unleash the wrath of heaven upon those who had broken their sacred vows. Jeremiah knew the hour was near. The temple must be cleansed, not only of its physical filth, but of the spiritual decay within. Only then could Jerusalem rise from its shadows, purified and renewed, to face the destiny carved out by the hand of God. The cry of Jerusalem grew louder, echoing through the sacred halls and into the hearts of its people, an urgent call for justice, truth, and rebirth. Chapter 13. The Silent Watchers. Beneath the veil of night, as Jerusalem lay shrouded in uneasy silence, there were those who kept watch, silent guardians whose presence went unnoticed by most. Jeremiah's visions led him to these watchers, shadowy figures standing at the edges of the city, between the worlds of men and angels. They were not warriors of sword or shield, but beings of light and shadow, bound by ancient purpose. Their eyes held the wisdom of countless ages, and their voices carried the weight of unspoken truth. These watchers had witnessed the city's rise and fall, the cycles of faith and rebellion, hope and despair. Jeremiah felt their gaze upon him, a mix of solemn warning and quiet encouragement. They spoke without words, revealing glimpses of the future, a tapestry woven with threads of sorrow and redemption. The watchers showed him visions of the coming judgment, the descent of the angels with wings aflame and eyes like stars. They also revealed the flickering embers of hope, hearts willing to repent, hands ready to rebuild, souls yearning for light. But the watcher's silence was a reminder. The fate of Jerusalem rested not in their hands, but in the choices of its people. The city's cry could summon salvation or bring about its ruin. As dawn broke over the city's ancient walls, Jeremiah stood with the silent watchers, feeling the burden of the prophecy heavier than ever. The time to awaken the people had come. The cry of Jerusalem echoed once more, a call to heed the watcher's warning and embrace the path of redemption before the shadows closed in forever. Chapter 14. The Looming Tempest. The winds of change stirred with a restless fury, swirling through Jerusalem's narrow streets and ancient alleys like a harbinger of the storm to come. Jeremiah felt it in his bones. The city's fate was unraveling, and with it, the fragile peace that had long held the people in uneasy balance. Clouds darkened above, heavy with the weight of impending judgment. The skies whispered secrets of battles fought and lost, of kingdoms rising and falling beneath the watchful gaze of the Almighty. The city braced itself, caught between the echoing cries of the past and the looming shadow of what was yet to be. Jeremiah's heart pounded as he walked the city's walls, his eyes scanning the horizon where armies gathered like predators awaiting their prey. The streets buzzed with rumors, whispers of betrayal, of alliances forged in fear, and of the angels poised to unleash their wrath. The people, restless and afraid, looked to their leaders for guidance, but found only hollow words and empty promises. The temple bells tolled with a mournful cadence, a dirge for the innocents lost and the time slipping away. Yet amid the turmoil, Jeremiah's vision held a flicker of hope, a chance for the city to stand strong, to unite and face the gathering storm with courage and faith. The path was narrow, fraught with peril, but not without redemption. He called out to the people, his voice rising over the growing chaos. Jerusalem, hear me. The storm gathers, but so does the strength within you. Turn from the ways that bind you in chains and rise as one. The winds howled louder, carrying the city's cry into the heavens. The gathering storm was upon them, but so too was the promise of dawn after the darkest night. Chapter 15. The Final Reckoning. The city trembled beneath the weight of destiny as the final hour approached. Jerusalem's ancient stones seemed to shudder, resonating with the cries of a people on the edge of despair and hope. Jeremiah stood at the city's highest tower, his eyes fixed on the horizon where dark clouds swirled and angels with blazing wings prepared to descend. The air was thick with tension, every breath a fragile thread holding the future in balance. Voices rose in prayer and fear, mingling with the distant drums of approaching armies. The streets below pulsed with restless energy as families clung to each other and warriors gripped their weapons tight. Jeremiah's heart was heavy, burdened by the knowledge that the city's fate was not yet sealed. His visions had shown both ruin and redemption, paths split by the choices of those who still had the power to turn from their sins. He raised his voice, a beacon amid the storm. Jerusalem, hear the cry of your own soul. The time has come to choose, to embrace the light and break the chains that bind you, or to fall into darkness and despair. The angels descended, their wings beating like thunder, their eyes blazing with divine judgment. Yet within their fierce gaze was also a flicker of mercy, waiting for the city to awaken. As the final reckoning unfolded, the cries of Jerusalem echoed across the heavens, a lament, a plea, and ultimately, a promise of hope reborn from ashes.